detail. And with every word Abeni wasn't, and Musa's grin broke. Walking away broke, she was leaving. Abeni met Musa, who was richer than he would ever be. When she was only 22, she was youthful, loving, and faith-based, constructing a shared future from as soon as they began dating. She handed in order to help him. Musa had large aspirations to launch his own IT business, and Abeni was standing next to him. She had her own aspiration to launch a fashion brand, but she ignored it since she believed that assisting him in his success was more crucial. That she put in a lot of overtime at the bank, came home to cook during the day, and tidy. Yet he was still able to be himself greatest supporter when they were unable to. Don't worry. Abeni paid the rent. She sold her jewels in secret so she could keep it. Them moving, she thought it was the truth. Love appeared to be what being a partner intended for her to think. If he rises, together we climb. She didn't feel helpless. For making the sacrifice, she believed she was acting morally. She had faith that all of her time, love, and effort would eventually return to her. What she was unaware of that while she was Musa was gradually forgetting as he lifted him, who assisted him in climbing. Yet even so, Abeni remained silent and kept her eyes open. She recalled everything as she watched. Everything about Musa's app was successful. Changed news stations during his lifetime. Began requesting an interview with him. Money arrived after being invited to major conferences. Quickly, and people started to treat him as a star, but as his universe expanded, Abeni's involvement in it diminished. The man who once publicly held her hand now moved in front of her as if she hadn't existed. He ceased referring to her as his wife at gatherings. He presented her as someone who simply assists those who are unaware of her. Once stayed up late to assist him construct that dream. They were unaware that she had sacrificed all for him. She was merely a supporting character. A drink bringer grinned, remained silent and courteously, even though it stung. Abeni remained quiet, and she observed as he burst out laughing with his new pals, acting as though she was not involved in his tale. And one night she heard he said something that was more profound than anything previously. Before a collection of Musa, one of his companions chuckled and remarked, "Abeni." They all thought she was just a phase. No one gave her a glance as they laughed with him. Nobody could see the anguish in her eyes. Held a tray of food in front of him, feeling more diminutive than before, as if the man she had become invisible to cherished the person she had now faith in. Pretended that she was merely a casual acquaintance. He had outgrown someone over his life. He failed to spot the lady who had been when he was without anything. He didn't observe how she gives up her power or her affection. He merely perceived her as someone who didn't no longer suited to his new environment, but her Abeni did not cry or scream in front of them. She just absorbed everything. Every utterance, every chuckle, every instant he gave her the impression that she was nothing. Remained motionless, yet something within had her heart was breaking as she began to alter. Yes, but there's a silent fire beneath that suffering. Was beginning to burn. And despite Abeni was able to glimpse it before Musa did. She was gradually waking up and recalling who before she sacrificed all. She was for him, and she wasn't going this time to vanish. One evening, Abeni was unable to sleep. Musa returned home late once more and headed directly to the living room to create a call that she didn't intend to hear. However, there was something booming about his voice. Tone caused her to pause in the corridor, prior to being instructed to dim the one who had faith in her own abilities before she began to use them exclusively for the benefit of others. She didn't tell Musa anything, that she kept what she had heard from him that night. She simply maintained her composure despite everything. Something inside her had changed irrevocably. If he believed she wasn't sufficient, that was okay. She wasn't going to dispute that. Wasn't going to cry, but she would rise, not to refute him, but she had to remind herself that she was beyond a person's phase. And while Musa joked with his pals, believing Abeni remained hidden in the darkness. Already returning to her spotlight, for Abeni lived two lives for the following 18 months. She didn't say anything during the day, did she? Routine duties and pretended to be everything was typical. Yet each evening when the house became quiet, Musa dozed off. She took out her laptop and sat down for hours, occasionally up until the early hours of the morning, drawing new patterns while observing tutorials and gaining knowledge about creating a fashion business, and she kept it to herself. was doing, and nobody noticed that she was progressively reconstructing the dream in which she was buried. Her hands moved purposefully over her heart. With a quiet resolve, she didn't use her given name, but rather decided on a new name that sounded brave, strong, and unheard of. Under that moniker with which she began her first digital, she launched a tiny online fashion line. People started to notice the store gradually. Orders arrived in comments that commended the distinctive methods, to which she replied courteously, concealing who she really is all this time. Occurred while she was still portraying the part. During the day, the silent wife Musa had launched a podcast in the meanwhile. Enjoyed discussing business accomplishment, and throughout his voyage, he frequently joked about women attempting to launch businesses. His visitors laughed as they said things similar to, "These alleged female founders, the majority of them are merely dressing up." Abeni would pretend while sitting in the corner to browse her phone while listening to. He didn't know the woman he was speaking to was sitting a few feet away and making fun of quietly constructing something larger than he ever could have imagined. Occasionally although her remarks hurt, she channeled that anguish as fuel every time he denigrated women. Like her, she put in more effort because she knew she was unable to stop. Now that she wasn't establishing a brand just to exact retribution, she was constructing to demonstrate to herself that she was still valuable enough, that her voice was important, and best of all, he had no thought each time Musa passed her. Without realizing, each time he chuckled at his own jokes on the Abeni podcast, kept her composed. She didn't require his presence. Not yet, since the globe would shortly, and it wouldn't be when that day arrived. Loud, it would be quiet, similar to how she had begun. However, this time the quietness would be more powerful than all of one afternoon. After hearing Musa's words, Annie decided to bring Musa lunch as a surprise. It was something she used at his office to frequently do in the beginning, just to demonstrate support and affection. She packed his favorite dinner, got into a taxi, and entered the structure with a faint grin in the hopes perhaps they could eat lunch quietly, jointly. But when she got to Musa's office was absent. Instead, the secretary sat at the desk, and although Benny had seen her previously, speaking straight to her, the woman was obviously taken aback to see Abeni at that time. Upon glancing at the lunch bag, she leaned back in her chair and grinned. Now that her baby bump was visible, Annie's gaze was unable to ignore it. Before Annie had a chance to ask any questions, the A-woman chuckled, saying, "You're the whoa, he told me you were all his." Wife Benny's heart fell when she saw her sick relative kept the food in her mouth and stood motionless. Her face is calm, but her mind is racing. That single sentence felt like a slap in the face. Not only from the female but also from the male had devoted all of their energy to Knights, the love, the sacrifices, and this was a fiction that he gave her in exchange. Treachery. And now a child with another, a woman who was unaware of the truth regarding who they truly were. But even in that, Abeni didn't raise her voice for a moment. Didn't protest or cry. She simply gazed at. After giving one nod, the woman turned around. With cautious steps she left that office. Steady steps, not due of her weakness however, since something within her had ultimately, not her heart was broken, but the shell that had prevented her from moving forward for too long. After she went outside, she inhaled deeply and withdrew her phone, and her voice phoned her attorney. "It's time," she remarked calmly. This was not the end of her. Rather, it was the start of her ultimate decision herself. She didn't require additional evidence that had witnessed enough of Musa's deceit and cheating and discarded all they owned. Constructed, but when it came to her turn, she wasn't going to ask him why she was crying or beg him to perform, for the woman he believed would never leave had already begun to move away. Musa sought for divorce from Benny. He walked, believing he had already won. Around, grinning proudly and sharing his friends who would shortly rush to her aid, return pleading for assistance or cash. The thought of her surviving made me giggle. He didn't think about him. Therefore she was still the silent spouse who remained in the background of a lifeless person. He even told those outside of him that she would request alimony, and he intended to reject her in order to discipline her. But Musa was unaware that Abeni possessed. Been anticipating this time. She had spent 18 months building in silence her company using a different name, a name Musa never bothered to inquire about. Throughout, he made fun of female business owners on his Abeni podcast, emerged as one of the most prosperous ones across the nation, all unnoticed by him. On the day of the Musa entered the courtroom during the divorce hearing. Similar to a man who has already prevailed in court, he wore pricey clothing, shades, and he whispered to his lawyer with a smug expression, "Just get it done, she has nothing." Yet when the judge inquired about Abby's side, were there any financial data to disclose? Her attorney got up and gave her a bank statements were in a hefty file. Official documents and income records demonstrating control of a rapidly growing ABN studio is a fashion firm. Was already negotiating brand partnerships and investors. With a recent valuation of $18, everyone was taken aback by the name, million. Blinking bewilderedly, ABN studio, he whispered, and it sounded like something he'd heard in passing before but ignored it. And as a result, it struck the woman he believed to be merely, it was the one sitting calmly at home. The woman behind a burgeoning enterprise. He would be meaningless without him. Grow into something much bigger than he never thought. Abeni would ignore him. She didn't smirk or boast in her rage. Simply sat quietly and with pride because the divorce wasn't a loss for her. Rather, it wasn't the end of her journey to freedom. It was the start of a depressing tale. She'd left her new one behind. Pain, disdain, betrayal, and stepping directly into prosperity, power, and purpose. She didn't require his funds. Desire anything from him due to the fact that she had everything constructed by herself already. Hands, and most importantly, he never even anticipated it. On the day of the final, the divorce hearing has come. The courtroom was silent but bustling with tension. Musa entered with assurance. Sporting pricey sunglasses and a broad grinning. He surveyed the area as if he owned the room, chuckling a little, and nodding at PEs like this were just another simple. He leaned over to his lawyer to win for him, and muttered, "Give her the documents. She isn't receiving anything." He genuinely felt she had nothing to do with Abeni. Name, money, power, and voice. Abeni sat quietly on the opposite side of the room. And silent, she wore nothing. Dazzling, with no makeup to hide the fatigue from the months spent building something hidden, yet visible to her, the kind of strength that doesn't must yell. That the judge came in and took a seat and started reading the formality, after which he gazed straight at "Do you have any assets?" Abeni questioned. "Any assertions to make before moving forward?" The audience remained silent as Musa glanced up at he wasn't expecting her, so he was a little perplexed. Abeni stood slowly before he could say anything. Retrieved a bag from within her bag. Folder, which she gave to her attorney, who placed it in the folder and handed it to the judge. Were all the records evidence of ownership, profits, investments, and alliances, and anything related to ABN? Page following page of the studio's listing. There was silence in the courtroom as the judge started. People leaned forward to read it. Oddly enough, Musa removed his sunglasses as the judge's smile faded further. It became evident that Abeni wasn't the frail lady Musa had portrayed. She wasn't impoverished, and she was obviously not helpless. She was the owner of a rapidly expanding fashion brand, one that was already collaborating with global investors and brands that the paperwork stats were outstanding. Was firm, and Musa's expression stated everything in shock, disbelief. And a little Ani was afraid that the courtroom wasn't simply a legitimate setting, it turned into her stage, not because to her desire to make Musa look bad, but since her reality was revealed for the first time. Was eventually said aloud. She didn't raise her voice, but instead of arguing, she just let the facts do the talking. And it produced more noise than anything Musa owned. Said that she had entered as he had attempted to hush the woman, but now she was as tall as the woman. During the whole, the judge had to be respected. Annie carried on reading the documents. Had turned in the entire courtroom. The judge listed wages and then fell silent. Global brand agreement and prospects. Objectives for growth connected to a fashion ABN studio is a firm that uses every sentence. Made Musa's room feel heavier. His smile began to shift in his countenance. The assurance in his eyes had vanished. Fading, he almost leaned forward in confusion. As if he was surprised at what he was. During the hearing, the judge brought up large numbers. Inked agreements with revenue in the millions, leading businesses, and intentions to increase the company into more nations. Everyone in the courtroom appeared taken aback, but more than Muir, his face went white. And he continued to gaze at Annie as though she was a new acquaintance of his. At last, he inclined toward her and Annie muttered, "ABN studio is yours." Slowly, she turned her head there. Her eyes were devoid of any anguish, rage, or fear, only subsided, and then she grinned. For the first time in years, a genuine smile that come from finally, not out of retaliation. She gazed at him while standing in her truth, and whispered, "It was always you just never asked," and it struck him more forcefully. More important to her than anything else for years. Been by his side, silent and unseen, forgotten. But during her entire been constructing something strong, and the worst part is that he never once realized, he never inquired about her current project. Never gave her dreams much thought. Thought she could influence her in some way. Oh, now in everybody's sight. He had to take a seat and hear the success story of the woman he had made fun of, disregarded, and he discovered too late that she had been deceived. Was more than just his subdued spouse. She didn't require his name or his money to achieve greatness. She had quietly completed it all by herself. Musa wisely sat back in his place without him. Abeni was rendered speechless by his chair. Didn't turn around because she didn't need her words had been sufficient, and she had consistently been the true power in the he simply never saw the story. But now the world did, and he had a chance to experience what it felt like being invisible after Abeni had everything revealed in court. The opportunity to learn a great deal from Musa. She may have requested the residence. She could have taken possession of the vehicles, furniture. She had money that they had previously legitimately split. The way that many anticipated her to seek retribution, to ruin him the way he attempted to shatter her. But she refused. Refused to have the house. That house contained too many painful memories. She didn't like being ignored and in quiet. Desire the vehicle, or it was just another item that Musa used to display another anything that held no significance for her. She no longer allowed him to keep it all. Clothing, the costly electronics, and she didn't care about the watch collection. Those things had lost their significance. She possessed something much more valuable. What Abeni brought with her was tranquility. Not material. She left that place. Courtroom while maintaining her dignity. She had maintained her composure the whole. She never screamed or cursed during that time. She never made an effort to make him feel uncomfortable. Elegant, and that elegance enhanced her stronger than any retaliation could possibly be. Furthermore, she went out with her. She owned an empire and studio. She silently constructed with her own hands. It was expanding quickly from the ground up. Beloved by clients and esteemed by brands. And the world was now aware of who. She didn't require his name behind it. Had created her own, and above all, Abeni left with a profound sense of calm. Tranquility that arises when you at last give up attempting to establish your value. For someone who didn't witness it, she was no longer dwelling in the shadow of others. At last, she was standing on her own light, and it was more pleasant than retaliation is preferable to stealing anything. He didn't destroy Musa. She didn't reveal his secrets to the public. Didn't bring him down like he had to her. She just developed and soared above the years of being, the betrayal, and the falsehood. She pushed him aside, surpassing him in every way. Manner, mental, emotional, and even Musa professionally. And he had all his items, but what he no longer possessed, he didn't have the woman who was her. Once had greater faith in him than he had faith in himself, and that loss, the disappearance of a Abeni-like woman, was anything that neither money nor a car house could. Instead of seeking retribution, she took her crown and put it on with silent strength. 6. The divorce had been finalized for months, and Musa sat by himself in a waiting area. Awaiting a meeting for business that was. He looked around since he was already running late. He tapped his fingers on the chair, bored. Before him on the little table where he picked up one of the mags without considering, just leafing through it till he came to a halt immediately on the picture on the cover touched his heart. Skip, it was Abeni wearing a fancy outfit. Standing tall with African fashion with assurance in her gaze, she stared not like the woman he had previously disregarded. Above her, the headline said, "Africa's the most enigmatic fashion queen was exposed."